Hi students, this is Mrs. T. I'm going to talk to you today about the first two stages of the demographic transition model. So behind me on the screen you can see that there is a graph that I have back here with some population pyramids. These things at the bottom should be familiar from last week when we learned about them. So these population pyramids correspond to these different stages of the demographic transition model. Demographic transition is about a growth in population over time. Crude birth rate, crude death rate are used to show the NIR, the natural increase rate of population. So remember, this is going to look at the NIR, which does not include immigration. It only includes the crude birth rate, crude death rate, and a comparison. So my goal right now is to talk to you about stage one, which is represented here, and there's a population pyramid that goes along with it, and stage two, because right here with all this stuff going on in stage three, we got a long conversation to talk about the reasons why that is going on right there. Okay, so stage one. Stage one is for the majority of human history, honestly. For the majority of human history, you had really high crude birth rates, but you also had really high crude death rates also. So the population of the world overall, the population of countries, was really, really low. So you see this line here that represents total population is very low in stage one, and way up here you see the birth rate and the death rate, and they are kind of fluctuating back and forth. So this is really like an estimation, but probably a very realistic estimation of what things were like before you had agriculture, which enabled people to diversify the kinds of jobs that they did in society and also spend time on other things like research in medicine and disease control and stuff like that, make innovations in that regard. Okay, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so let me talk about stage one for just a second. So we covered foraging, horticulture, and pastoralism. Even though each of those subsistence strategies still exist today throughout the world, there isn't one particular country that you can cite that has foraging as their subsistence strategy, or horticulture as their subsistence strategy, pastoralism as their subsistence strategy. I mentioned the Maasai as an example of a modern day group that has historically, for 4,000 years of evidence that we have, been pastoralists and still are for the most part today. But there are elements of industrialization that have come into play with their subsistence strategy also. But think about this time in human history in stage one. Think about this as being a world dominated by foraging or horticulture, even pastoralism, as really the earliest and the only subsistence strategies that existed. There's really not a modern day country that exists in stage one. So the birth rate is high, and the death rate is very high also. Contraceptive techniques are not, at least not modern contraceptive techniques, are not really available here, and calories are not necessarily secure. In other words, you don't necessarily have food security all the time here. So you might have a high birth rate because you're trying to have as many children as you can to keep them alive, because not all of them are going to live until adulthood. So you have as many children as you can, but because of food insecurity, which was a social condition, you might not be able to have all of those children achieve adulthood, and so they would die along the way, which would also keep this death rate high. Or disease, for instance. When foraging, horticulture, and pastoralism are your culture's subsistence strategy, the majority of the work that you do each day is related directly to that subsistence strategy. So for instance, if you are a forager, well, that includes hunting and gathering. To gather stuff, you need resources like something to carry it in, or a trap to set so that it'll collect fish or trap lizards or something like that. Whatever it is that you're going to gather or hunt, you need tools and weapons in order to be successful at those kinds of things. So even if you are not spending most of your day hunting, even if you're not spending most of your day fishing like you and I maybe think of fishing off a riverbank or something with a beer beside us, no, you wouldn't necessarily do it that way at all if you were in a horticultural society that had foraging as a supplement to your food getting strategy. You would make a trap for fish to swim in and not be able to get out, or you would set snares for birds to get locked into so you could go and gather them later. So the majority of your day is revolves around your food getting strategy. Even if you're not out actively hunting or gathering, you are working on something like processing the food that you hunted and gathered, distributing the food that you hunted and gathered, or repairing equipment or developing equipment that you need, baskets, pouches, spears, this kind of thing, that you have to make in order to be successful at hunting and gathering, for instance. So you are not devoting your time to researching what makes people sick and why they die prematurely. You're not even thinking about premature death. You might just think that death is a part of life, which it is, and that death is inevitable. And so you have as many people in your population as you can, because very many people are going to die and not very many are going to reach adulthood. And that's why population stayed low, even though this birth rate and death rate are extremely high up there. They're relatively canceling each other out. And so you can see this population pyramid down here that shows you that a huge number of people are being born, but look how narrow it gets as it sweeps up to that really sharp point. It is narrowing very, very quickly, which means the older you are, the more likelihood it is that you're going to die. I mean, it starts to sweep in really early too. So you see that some people aren't even living until their first birthday. You see that sweep inward. So there are no countries in the world today that are in stage 1. You might find an isolated tribal group here or there throughout the world that could be classified as stage 1, but not an entire country. Instead, agriculture really, really changed things. So in agriculture, not industrialized agriculture, we're not talking about the agricultural revolution yet. We're talking about the kind of agriculture that you do with your hands, elbow grease, like my grandmother used to say. You have simple tools, they are hand tools. You don't have beasts of burden, such as an ox or a horse or a mule or anything like this, in order to help you with the majority of the work. The majority of the work you are doing by human power, not beast of burden power or machine or complex tool assistance. And so in stage 2, you see, because human power is so vital for the subsistence strategy, you see the birth rate stay very, very high. And because agriculture focuses on a surplus of food, you see food insecurity decrease significantly. You have a higher likelihood of more calories being available to the individual and the community as a whole, and therefore you see death rates go down, because the more nutrition an individual has, even though there's really not a disease cure system, or in demographic transition stage 2, there's not any division of labor where you can really heavily focus on research and development to prevent diseases and improve health and well-being. You are improving health and well-being kind of linked to the fact that calories are so much more readily available, and the more robust your calorie intake is with quality calories, not processed food like the industrial food supply that we have today, But the more quality nutrition that you have, the death rate is going to go down because the body is going to be able to have a more robust immune system and fight off these diseases and such. So in stage 2, we're not talking about the death rate going down because we've discovered penicillin or anything. No, that is way long in the future from stage 2. But because the death rate is going down, because food security has increased, and the birth rate is still up high because human power, human hands, big families to produce food on farms is vital. You see the birth rate high, fewer people dying at a young age, and so you see this sharp increase in population. This is what, down here, is what the pyramid looks like for that particular life experience, that particular stage in human history. You see a high birth rate, and instead of that steep swooping inward in your population pyramid depicting quick death for that section of the population, you do see a slope upward, but it's a more gradual and consistent slope upward. So there is a more predictable death rate rather than all this fluctuation like back here in this stage 1 of demographic transition. So this population pyramid tells us that males and females, and this is a prediction, males and females are being produced at the same rate. They're having live births at the same rate, and the death rate is lower. So instead of swooping in the sides like this stage 1 pyramid over here, it's a more gradual increase toward old age. And this line right here, I don't know if you can see it well, but this line is like 65 years old. So you see that there are far more people in this section above the 65-year-old line who are still alive in society when stage 2 of the demographic transition happened. Okay, so this is when agriculture was an innovative technique and people were able to increase the number of people in the population overall because the food resources increased, surplus was available, which meant food insecurity was less prevalent, and that helped us just with our natural immunity stay alive longer and be a healthier population. In this stage of demographic transition, let's talk about gender roles for just a second. We have a chapter coming up. We're probably not going to get to it until after midterm, but we have a chapter coming up on gender and social identity and other identifying factors that people today take for granted. But back then, in stage 2, when big families were really, really vital in order for you to have a whole lot of workers available to make a farm successful, females' position in the household was seen as a reproductive function, and honestly a reproductive function only. They were seen as a support mechanism, but their social value as that support mechanism was fairly solidified, I guess that's the word I'm looking at. It wasn't as though there was an oppression or a lack of social respect. Females were vital because they were that giver of life force, to sound kind of mystical about it, but they were why excuse me, birth rate could stay high and people were living longer because they were in charge of making sure that that food was distributed, even though they weren't actually the workers in the fields. So females had a significant place here, but to our modern sensibilities, we might not like the idea that a female's place is in the home. Well, this is where that idea comes from. Agriculture, really, because agriculture creates a completely different mindset so that you need a large family, and who's really responsible for that large family? It's the female, who has the reproductive function and the caregiving function to bring up those people to an appropriate age, so to speak. So this is a relatively short video, but I'm going to stop it here because the section stage 3, that section is going to take us a little while to talk about it. So I'm going to stop here and then pick up again with stage 3 in our next video. So thank you for your attention, and I will see you then.